house at 412 Blackwood Lane didn't just look old. It looked exhausted. It was a Victorian relic with peeling gray paint that resembled dead skin, standing in the center of a lot where the grass had long ago surrendered to the weeds. I inherited it from my Uncle Arthur, a man I hadn't seen in 20 years, a man the family spoke of only in hushed, nervous tones. When the lawyer handed me the heavy iron key, he didn't offer congratulations. He just looked at me with a pitying sort of weariness and said, "Stay out of the attic, Julian. Some memories are better left under lock and key." I laughed then. I was 32, broke, and cynical. I thought he was being poetic. I thought he was talking about dust and old tax returns. I didn't realize he was giving me a survival guide. The air inside the house was thick, tasting of copper and stagnant time. I spent the first few hours moving my meager belongings into the master bedroom on the second floor. Every floorboard screamed under my weight, a rhythmic creak snap that echoed through the hollow hallways. It was exactly midnight when the first sound started. Thump. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was heavy. It was deliberate. Came from directly above my head. Thump. Scrape. Thump. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The attic. The lawyer's warning flashed in my mind. No longer poetic, now a cold stone in my gut. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling. The plaster was cracked, forming a map of a territory I didn't want to explore. Then the scraping stopped. In its place came a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a wet, rhythmic breathing. Che, huff, ha, huff. It was loud, as if the creature, whatever it was, had its mouth pressed against the floorboards, whispering through the wood. "Who's there?" I whispered. My voice sounded pathetic in the dark. The breathing stopped. For a long, agonizing minute, there was absolute silence. Then, a voice, thin, raspy, and sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement, drifted down. "Julian, you have your mother's eyes. They'll look so pretty in the dark." I didn't sleep. I sat with a kitchen knife in my hand until the sun bled through the curtains. The next morning, the terror of the night felt like a fever dream, but the scratches on the ceiling were real. Deep, gouged lines in the plaster that hadn't been there the day before. I decided to talk to the neighbors. Mrs. Gable, a woman who looked like she was made entirely of wrinkles and resentment, lived next door. When I asked about my Uncle Arthur, she crossed herself. "Arthur didn't live alone, boy," she whispered, her eyes darting to the attic window of my house. "He fed it, every Tuesday, raw meat from the butcher. He said it was the only way to keep the family debt from coming downstairs." "What family debt?" I asked, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. "The thing that shouldn't be," she snapped, retreating into her house. "Arthur stopped feeding it near the end. That's why he died screaming. You have the look of him, Julian. Be careful. Hunger is a cruel master." I went to the butcher. I didn't know what else to do. I bought 5 pounds of raw beef, my hands shaking as I handed over the cash. That evening, I stood at the base of the attic stairs. The door was heavy oak, reinforced with 3 separate deadbolts. My uncle hadn't just been keeping something in. He'd been barricading it. I unlocked the first bolt. Clack. The second. Clack. The third. Thud. I didn't open the door. I pushed the meat through the small service slot at the bottom, a modification Uncle Arthur must have made. The moment the meat slid onto the attic floor, something lunged. There was no growl, just the sound of tearing, wet, frantic, and ravenous. I pressed my ear to the wood, a morbid curiosity overcoming my fear. "More!" The voice rasped. It was closer now, right behind the door. "So hungry, Julian. The meat is cold. I want something warm, something with a pulse." I backed away, tripping over my own feet. The attic door rattled. Not a shake, but a rhythmic pounding, like a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. Days bled into a week. The sounds didn't stop. They evolved. The creature started mimicking things. On Thursday, I heard my mother's voice calling my name from the top of the stairs. My mother had been dead for 10 years. On Friday, it sounded like a crying infant. On Saturday, it was the sound of a woman sobbing. A heartbroken, soulful sound that pulled at my chest. I was losing my mind. I hadn't left the house in 48 hours. The walls felt like they were closing in, the gray paint turning into a sickly bruised purple in the twilight. I found myself standing in front of the attic door, the key in my hand. I wanted to see it. I needed to see the face of the thing that knew my name. I reached for the first bolt. My fingers were inches away when the scratching started again. But this time it wasn't on the door. It was inside my own head. A sharp, stinging pain behind my eyes, and a vision of a basement. Not the one in this house, but a basement from a memory I didn't own. A man in a dark robe, a circle of salt, and a shadow that didn't have a body. "Open it, Julian," the voice whispered, now inside my skull. "Break the debt. Let us be one." I pulled my hand back, gasping for air. I ran to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see my reflection. I saw Uncle Arthur. He looked terrified. He pointed a finger at his own throat and mimed a cutting motion. Then the mirror shattered. Tonight is Tuesday again. I'm sitting in the kitchen. The meat is on the counter, but I'm not going to feed it. Not this time. The house is silent. Too silent. Usually, by now, the thumping has started. But tonight, there is only the sound of the clock ticking. Tick, tick, tick. And then I hear it. Not from the attic. From the basement. The creature isn't just in the attic anymore. It's moving through the walls. I can hear the wood splintering behind the wallpaper. It's circling me. It's hunting. I have a choice. I can run into the night and never look back, or I can go up there and end this. My hand is on the attic key. My heart is a drum. I am going to open the door. The attic door didn't creak when I opened it. It sighed, as if the house itself was relieved to finally let the rot breathe. The air that hit me was cold, colder than the winter night outside, and it smelled of old pennies and wet fur. I stepped into the darkness with a heavy flashlight in one hand and my uncle's old service pistol in the other. I wasn't a brave man, but I was a man who had reached the end of his tether. The beam of my light cut through the gloom, illuminating mountains of junk. Moth-eaten furniture, stacks of newspapers from the 1950s, and mirrors, dozens of them, all covered in heavy black cloth. "I know you're here," I said, my voice shaking like a leaf in a gale. "I'm not bringing meat tonight. I'm bringing an end." A soft, melodic hum drifted from the shadows behind a stack of trunks. It was a lullaby my mother used to sing. It was perfect, too perfect. "Julian," the voice whispered, no longer raspy but sweet and clear. "Why the weapon? Don't you want to see what your family worked so hard to keep?" A figure stepped into the light. My heart stopped. It was a woman, or at least it had the shape of one. She was draped in a tattered white gown that looked like it had been stitched together from funeral shrouds. Her hair was long and black, cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of ink. But it was her skin that made me want to scream. It was iridescent, shimmering with a sickly blue and green glow that pulsed in time with my own heartbeat. "You aren't a monster," I breathed, lowering the gun an inch. "Monsters are just stories people tell to feel better about their own cruelty," she said, her green eyes locking onto mine with a hypnotic intensity. "Your Uncle Arthur didn't keep me here because I was dangerous. He kept me here because I am the memory of a bargain. A debt paid in blood and silence." She called herself Mara. She told me she was older than the house, older than the town itself. She spoke of a time when the world was fire and steam, and her people had fled the stars to hide in the deep places of the earth. My ancestors, she claimed, were not victims, but jailers who had stumbled upon her kind and used their spark to ensure prosperity for the Blackwood line. As she spoke, the fear began to drain out of me, replaced by a thick, heavy lethargy. The room seemed to expand, the junk receding into a warm, bioluminescent haze. She touched my cheek, and her fingers were warm. Not the cold touch of a corpse, but a vibrant, living heat. "You've been lonely, Julian," she whispered. "The world outside is chaotic and cruel, but here in the dark we can be eternal. I can give you the power your uncle was too afraid to take." She showed me things, visions that danced in the air like dust motes in the sun. I saw the Blackwood family rising from poverty to wealth, the secret rituals in the basement, and the way the house acted as a living seal, holding the primordials beneath the earth. She wasn't the creature in the attic. She was the guardian of the bridge between our world and something much larger. For the first time in my life, I felt important. I felt chosen. But as the nights went on, the sanctuary began to show its cracks. I spent more time in the attic and less in the world. My skin began to turn pale, then translucent, just like hers. My hunger for normal food vanished, replaced by a craving for the raw, metallic scent of the earth. One night, while Mara slept in the shadows, I moved one of the black cloths covering a mirror. I expected to see my face. Instead, I saw a mass of tentacles and impossible jaws, a creature of cosmic hatred staring back at me with my own green eyes. The vision shattered. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer human. My nails had grown into dark, curved claws, and a pattern of glowing scales was creeping up my forearms. "Mara!" I called out. She appeared behind me, her beauty now looking like a thin, fragile mask stretched over a nightmare. "The transformation is almost complete, Julian," she said, her voice sounding like 1,000 crystals shattering at once. "The debt isn't just a memory, it's a consumption. To keep the seals closed, a Blackwood must become a part of the house. You aren't inheriting a home. You are becoming the new cornerstone." I realized then that Uncle Arthur hadn't been feeding her to keep her quiet. He had been feeding her to keep her in. He had known that if the Guardian left the attic, the seals in the basement would break, and the entities beneath, the things she called the Silence, would rise and consume the world. The thumping I heard wasn't her walking. It was the house trying to digest me. It was the sound of my own humanity being unraveled thread by thread. "I won't do it," I shouted, my voice now a guttural roar that didn't sound like me at all. "I'm leaving." "You can't," she hissed, her face contorting into something wild and demonic, her horns lengthening in the shadows. "You've already tasted the gift. You've breathed the abyssal air. If you leave, your body will turn to dust, and the seals will shatter. Millions will die because of your selfishness." She lunged at me, her athletic, feminine grace replaced by a predator's speed. I fought back, my new strength surprising even me. We crashed through the junk, breaking furniture and tearing through the black shrouds covering the mirrors. As the mirrors were uncovered, the attic filled with a blinding, ghostly light. Mara screamed, her iridescent skin smoking where the light touched it. I scrambled toward the door, but the floorboards didn't just creak. They opened like a mouth. I fell through the wood, tumbling down into the darkness of the second floor, then the first until I struck the cold, damp stone of the basement. I lay there in the dark, my body aching with a fatigue that felt eternal. The air down here smelled of sulfur and molten metal. I could hear something vast and ancient stirring beneath the floor, a roar that didn't come from a throat, but from the earth itself. I saw the circle of salt. I saw the obsidian dagger forged from the void. And I saw Uncle Arthur, not a ghost, but a petrified soul, his body turned to stone to strengthen the seal. The lawyer's warning echoed in my mind. He hadn't been trying to save me from a monster. He had been trying to save the world from me. "Julian!" Mara's voice drifted down from the hole in the ceiling, sounding sorrowful and ancient. "The dawn is coming. You have until the first light to decide. Will you drink the blood of the covenant and take your place as the guardian? Or will you let the silence consume everything you've ever loved?" I looked at the dagger. I looked at the stone remains of my uncle. I felt the power of the abyss pulsing in my veins, a silver and green glow that promised eternity and demanded everything. The basement was a cathedral of damp stone and ancient, pulsing veins. I lay there, my human skin feeling like a suit that was 3 sizes too small, watching the iridescent scales on my arms shimmer in the rhythmic, sickly green light emanating from the floorboards. The silence beneath was no longer a metaphor. It was a physical weight, a vibration that rattled my teeth and hummed in the marrow of my bones. "You can feel them, can't you?" Mara's voice drifted down from the jagged hole above, soft and mournful. "They are the architects of the void. Your ancestors didn't build this house to live in. They built it to weigh down the lid of a coffin." I looked at the obsidian dagger lying near the salt circle. It was cold, so cold it seemed to draw the very heat from the air around it. My hand, now tipped with dark, curved claws, reached for it. The metal felt like ice against my palm, but as I gripped the hilt, a jolt of lightning-white pain shot up my arm. I dragged myself toward the center of the room, where the stone remains of Uncle Arthur stood like a grim sentinel. Up close, his expression wasn't one of terror, but of an exhausted, hollowed-out peace. He had become the cornerstone, his very life force petrified to keep the entities from breaking through. "Is this my fate?" I roared, my voice now a layered discord of human grit and something deeper, something older. "To turn to stone in a basement while the world goes on without me? The world only goes on because of you, Julian," Mara replied, her shadow stretching across the basement walls, appearing more like a mass of shifting limbs than a woman. "Every Blackwood before you chose the sacrifice. They chose to be the lock so the world wouldn't have to see the key." She descended from the ceiling, not falling, but gliding as if the air itself was water. She landed softly, her white shroud trailing over the wet stone like mist. Her eyes were no longer green. They were pits of swirling starlight. "The dawn is 5 minutes away," she whispered, pointing to a small, high window where the sky was turning a bruised purple. "If the blood isn't spilled on the seal by the time the first ray hits the glass, the house will fold in on itself. The silence will rise, and you, Julian, will be the first thing they eat." My mind raced. I thought about my life before this house, the mundane debts, the lonely apartment, the feeling of being a ghost in my own existence. I realized that Mara was right about one thing. I had been looking for a purpose. But was this it? To be a cosmic janitor for a family of jailers? I looked at the dagger, then at the salt circle, and finally at Mara. Something didn't fit. The lawyer's panic, the mirrors in the attic, the way Arthur had fed her raw meat. "If you're the guardian," I said, my voice steadying, "why do you need me to spill the blood? Why couldn't you do it yourself after Arthur died?" Mara paused, her iridescent skin flickering like a dying bulb. "The guardian is the bridge, Julian. But the bridge cannot walk across itself. Only a living soul can bind the void." I gripped the dagger tighter. I could feel the silence screaming beneath my feet, a pressure so intense I thought my eardrums would burst. I stepped into the salt circle. The air inside was still and smelled of ozone. "Do it," Mara urged, her face a mask of desperate hunger. "Save them all. Be the hero the Blackwoods were born to be." I raised the dagger, the tip pointed at my own chest. The first sliver of golden light touched the edge of the basement window. "Wait," I whispered. I remembered the mirrors in the attic. Why were they covered? Mara said it was to hide her beauty, but when I had uncovered one, I saw a monster. But I hadn't seen her monster. I had seen mine. The mirrors weren't hiding the creature. They were the only things that showed the truth. I looked at Mara, and then I looked at my own scaled, clawed hands. I realized the horrific truth. Mara wasn't the guardian. She wasn't an alien or a primordial. Mara was the bait. The silence beneath the house wasn't a group of entities. It was a single, starving consciousness that fed on the guilt and the self-sacrifice of the Blackwood bloodline. Every time a Blackwood sacrificed themselves to save the world, they weren't strengthening a seal. They were feeding the beast. Uncle Arthur hadn't turned to stone to save the world. He had been digested. "You aren't protecting the world from them," I said, a cold laugh bubbling in my throat. "You're preparing a meal for it." Mara's face didn't just contort. It dissolved. The beautiful woman vanished, leaving behind a spindly, pale thing with too many joints and eyes that wept black oil. "It doesn't matter," she hissed, her voice a chorus of the dead. "The light is here. If you don't bleed, the house falls. You die either way. No, I said, stepping out of the salt circle. If the house is the lid, then let it break. I'd rather the world face the truth than live on the lies of my family's blood. I didn't plunge the dagger into my heart. I plunged it into the center of the salt circle, into the stone floor itself. The ground didn't just crack. It shattered. The house let out a scream that shook the foundation of the earth. The walls began to buckle, the wood splintering into a million jagged teeth. Mara was sucked downward, her shrieks lost in the roar of the rising silence. I felt the gravity shift. The basement floor dissolved into a swirling vortex of shadow and light. I saw the faces of 100 Blackwoods, all trapped in the stone, their eyes widening as the cycle finally broke. I expected to die. I expected the silence to consume me. But as the house collapsed, as the weight of the legacy finally crumbled into the earth, I felt something I hadn't felt since I arrived at Blackwood Manor. I felt light. The darkness didn't eat me, passed through me like a cold wind. I woke up hours later in the middle of a forest clearing where the house had once stood. There was nothing left but a deep, blackened crater in the earth, and the smell of ozone and old pennies. My hands were human again. No scales, no claws, just the hands of a man who had nothing left but his life. I walked away from the crater, not looking back. The world didn't end. The sun rose, birds sang, and the town of Oakhaven woke up to find the haunted manor on the hill simply gone. But sometimes, when it's very quiet and the wind is just right, I hear a soft, melodic hum in the back of my mind. It's a lullaby, and I know that somewhere, deep in the earth, the silence is still waiting. It's just looking for a new family to tell a story to. If you love this story and want more contents like this, comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, check out the channel for interesting videos.